Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Bihari. Jayo Gopi Jana Vallabha, Girivaradhari. Jayo Gopi Jana Vallabha, Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Bihari. Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jayo Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So, Hare Krishna everybody. Today we will be reading from Caitanya Caritamrta Adi Leela chapter 17, verse number 129 and 130. Eta balika jagela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila pana bada shoka. Eta balika jigela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila panya bada shoka. Eta balika jigela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila panya bada shoka. Would anyone else like to recite the verse? Eta balika jigela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila pana bada shoka. Eta balika jigela nagariya shoka. Prabhu sthane nivedila pana bada shoka. Eta balika jigela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila pana bada shoka. Eta balika jigela nagariya loka. Prabhu sthane nivedila pana bada shoka. So, word meaning? Eta bali, thus saying. Kaji, the magistrate. Gela, returned. Nagariya loka, the citizens in general. Prabhu sthane, before the Lord. Nivedila, submitted. Panya, getting. Bada, very much. Shoka, short. So translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. After saying this, the Qazi returned home, and the devotees, greatly shocked that they were forbidden to chant Hare Krishna, submitted their grief to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So I'll just read the next verse as well. I'll read the translation and the purport. So, Lord Chaitanya ordered, go perform Sankirtan. Today I will kill all the Mohammedans. Purport. Gandhi is known for having started the movement of non-violent civil disobedience in India. But about 500 years before him, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu started his movement of non-violent civil disobedience to the order of Chand Kazi. It is not necessary to commit violence to stop the opposition from hindering a movement. One can kill their demoniac behavior with reason and argument. Following in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whenever there are obstacles in the Hare Krishna movement, they should kill the opposition with reason and argument and thus stop their demoniac behavior. If we become violent in every case, it would be difficult for us to manage our affairs. We should therefore follow in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who disobeyed the order of Chand Kazi but subdued him with reason and argument. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakhajatam Sakana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीन बंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लांघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारणं नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So these two verses essentially are talking about, they're discussing the pastime of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his devotees, and Chandkazi. So as we all know from the history that Chandkazi was opposed to the Hare Krishna movement. When the devotees were chanting Hare Krishna, he ordered that, he essentially broke all the mridangas and he ordered everyone not to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And because of this, it is described that the devotees were greatly shocked and they submitted their grief to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now the devotees love chanting Hare Krishna, not just because it's a nice mantra to chant, but because there are many, many reasons why devotees chant Hare Krishna. So first of all, devotees chant, well, firstly for their own purification, but secondly for the purification of the whole world, and for the benefit of other living entities, not just human beings. So when someone stops a great charitable activity, which is chanting of this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the devotees themselves, they become quite distressed. So it's not that they're becoming distressed because of some personal, just because of some personal inconvenience that's caused to them, but because they understand that, as we read in Shikshashtakam, that this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is the prime benediction for society at large. So when the devotees are stopped from chanting Hare Krishna, here it is described that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu got extremely angry also. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then decided that today I will kill all of the Mohammedans. Now this may sound like a very controversial statement, especially being discussed in today's scenario and considering how much violence there is already going on in this world. But it should be understood from Srila Prabhupada's purport what the real meaning of that is. So it's not that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went and actually killed all of the Mohammedans and all of the Muslims who were fighting against the Hare Krishna movement. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to kill their demoniac mentality, which is often mentioned. So that is something that has been entrusted, not just something that has been going on not since Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but even before that, and this tradition will continue in the future also. Like we see in the Vedic culture, for example, that Srila Prabhupada also points out that reason and discussion is something that's very important, and that is what can be used to subdue demoniac thoughts or subdue the opposing party. And actually this has played a role in Vedic culture since time immemorial. Actually, like if we look at Vedic culture, like there have been lots of discussions. Like if we read the Upanishads, for example, in the Upanishads, for example, there's one Upanishad known as the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And over there, the king Janak, he holds a massive a sabha, it's called. So sabha is like a massive gathering of all scholars from all over his kingdom and other kingdoms abroad as well, where they wanted to discuss the nature of the absolute truth. And a section of this also comes in Srimad Bhagavatam, like towards the end, like in 11th canto, when the Navyogendras come in. But here it is described that Brahmanas and Vipras from all over the world had come to participate in King Janak's gathering to determine the nature of the absolute truth. And over there was one sage known as Yagyavalkya, and Yagyavalkya also attended that discussion. And essentially, there was, while people were presenting different types of arguments and different types of reasonings, Yagyavalkya just stood still and did not say anything until he was prompted to speak. So it was, and essentially after that, when Yagyavalkya started to prove his superiority over everyone else, then everyone started to question him and started to see whether he really knew the absolute truth very well. And Yagyavalkya essentially defeated all of them in the debate. And the prize for the debate was 1,000 cows. So whoever wins the debate takes home 1,000 cows. So then he took those 1,000 cows and he left. But it is described that that debate ended up becoming violent also. So even though they were Brahmanas, how could Brahmanas engage in violence? Well, they did have their own tactics. It is described that the Brahmanas would often challenge each other, and they would say to each other that if you do not answer my question, or if you answer my question incorrectly, your head will explode. Like, it may sound like a very weird thing to say, but the Brahmanas back in the day had power to do all of this. So no one would unnecessarily challenge, or no one would unnecessarily argue with someone unless they had higher knowledge of the absolute truth. So through this, it was understood that Yagyavalkya was the supreme most personality or supreme most Brahmana in that assembly. And we see this tradition, if you read all of the other Upanishads, this tradition tends to continue. In the Chandogya Upanishad also, we see exactly the same thing, where some person is performing a yagya, where there's a Brahmana who's performing a yagya, and then someone else comes along and asks that Brahmana that, do you know the meaning behind this mantra that you're reciting? Then before the Brahmana could answer, giving the meaning, the challenger would often say that, you know, if you answer this question incorrectly, then your head would explode. And then the other person would say, okay, fine, well, I don't want my head to explode, so I will fall at your lotus feet and ask you for what is the meaning. So you can see that these discussions would often sometimes also become quite violent, even though they were Brahmanas. And that is the nature of discussion. That is the nature of not just discussion, but any kind of debate, that they, even though superficially they may look like quite civilized, but they can eventually become quite violent. You need someone to oversee these kinds of discussions to make sure that it's not going off in like a very tangential direction. But having said that, this has been done since time immemorial. Like we can see even in the Western tradition, like this used to happen. Like after, I think, 300 years after the passing of Jesus Christ, there was a huge gathering of all of the Christian saints in the kingdom of Constantine. And then over there, they decided, you know, which gospels to use, etc. And I think that discussion went on for a couple of years. So people were interested in discussion, and people were not shy of discussion. In fact, that was considered to be one of the arts. If we read the 64 arts that Krishna mentions, one of them is debating and one of them is discussion. So it was considered to be a part of civilized society, that if there were differences between people, they would sit down and they would discuss these things and resolve these things based on that, no matter how long it took to resolve these things as well. So in the Vedic tradition, it is described that there are 3 different types of debate or intellectual discussions. One of them is known as Vada, one of them is known as Vitanda, and the last one is known as Jalpa. Now, what are these things? You'll see that these things are very, very much relevant in today's time also. Like, Vada is where someone presents a theorem or someone presents a theory, and that theory is tested by everyone. So everyone can see whether or not something you have said is true or not. Like one classic example we can see in the modern world is like if anyone is into reading and understanding scientific literature, we do this all the time. So like there'll be an article that's published in a journal and then everyone sits down and discusses whether the conclusions of this article are correct or not. So similarly in the Vedic tradition also, people would do exactly the same thing. They would present a proposition like, for example, I think that Agni is supreme. Why? Because the first verse of Rig Veda glorifies Agni, so therefore I think Agni is supreme. So then that theory would be tested, like people would just present arguments for and against, but no one would present a counter view. So that is known as Vada. Next one is known as Vitanda. Vitanda is this is a ghastly form of intellectual discussion where all you do is just cut down the opponent. So if someone is presenting a view, you don't offer any arguments for your position, but you just destroy the other person. Like, for example, we see on the internet nowadays also, like there are atheists who try to bash all the theists by saying, oh, God doesn't exist. If God exists, then why is there so much evil in the world, etc. They're not interested in establishing their own position, but all they're interested in is destroying the other person's position. So that form of argumentation was known as Vitanda. And then you had the proper type of debate, which was known as Jalpa, where people would sit down and they would try to discuss, and they would have a one-on-one debate. So you would present your side, the opposing person would present their side, and then you'd present arguments to refute the other person and establish your own position. And this kind of stuff would keep going on for days and days. We see in the Vedic culture, again, as I pointed out, this was very common. Like, people would sit down and debate all the time. Like when Buddhists took over, so after Lord Buddha appeared in 600 BC, at that time Buddhism was flourishing all over the Indian subcontinent. And at that time, there were only a few intellectual scholars who were capable enough to remove Buddhism from the whole Indian subcontinent. And it wasn't done through fighting, it wasn't done through violence as such. It was done through intellectual discussion and debate. One of the terms of the debates was that whoever loses becomes a disciple of the winner. Now, that's an interesting proposition to keep. So therefore, the only persons who would be debating were the ones who would be confident of their victory. So it is described that the tradition started with Adi Shankaracharya. So Shankaracharya is known as the famous impersonalist, but he also did a great service to the Vedic tradition by preserving the Vedas also. So not many people understand that, but actually the Buddhist traditions are known as Gnostic traditions. So Gnostic means that they reject the Vedas. They don't accept Vedas as authority. So to re-establish the Vedas, Shankaracharya took up the responsibility of going from place to place, town to town, village to village, city to city, and debating with all the Buddhists to re-establish the Vedic truths and to re-establish the Vedas. So we see that after he did all of this, basically Buddhism was almost wiped out from the Indian subcontinent, but it spread to all of the other neighboring regions like Myanmar, China, and Thailand, etc. Like, it managed to spread everywhere else, but at least in the Indian subcontinent it stayed. Then we see that after Shankaracharya, we see that Ramanujacharya appeared. And Ramanujacharya now had a huge task of not only establishing the Vedic tradition, but also of establishing the supremacy of Lord Vishnu or Narayan. And to say that we are not ultimately, because what Shankaracharya did was, Shankaracharya basically established impersonalism. So he proved to everyone, or he told everyone that, or convinced everyone that the Atma and Paramatma are one and the same. That Krishna and Jivatma are one and the same, that there is no difference. So in one sense it was a disguised form of Buddhism, but at least he established the Vedas. So he did the groundwork. Now Ramanujacharya had to come and do the other part of the groundwork, which was that he had to establish the supremacy of Lord Vishnu and Narayan and show that the Jivatma, or the living being or the living entity, is always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and the living entity can never become the Supreme Lord. So then he engaged in debate also. It is described that he engaged in debate with his own guru at the age of 7. Like, his guru was Yadava Prakash, and Yadava Prakash was an impersonalist, and Ramanujacharya engaged in debate and defeated him as well, because of which Yadava Prakash became extremely angry and he tried to kill the 7-year-old child by drowning him in a river. But Ramanujacharya managed to escape, and he eventually established the Sri Sampradaya. And eventually it is described that Yadav Prakash also came and became a disciple of Ramanujacharya. So that is explained also. But Ramanujacharya had another great task, which although Adi Shankaracharya had removed Buddhism from the Indian subcontinent, Ramanujacharya had a huge task to remove Jainism from the Indian subcontinent. Now, Jainism we consider as being a very non-violent religion, and we consider it as being, like these people, they don't eat, they're very similar to the Vaishnavas in the sense that they don't eat onion and garlic, and they don't eat anything which is from the ground. They don't want to cause violence to any living entities. They're sannyasis, so to speak. They only wear like a very thin loincloth because they don't want like to kill bugs and stuff that may get caught in their clothes and stuff. So they live very austere lives. But actually their philosophy is also completely against the Vedas. And they don't recognize the supremacy of the Supreme Lord. Like I'll give you one example where we can see how the Jain mindset actually works. So in the Jain tradition, they understand that Lord Rama, when he appeared on this earth, he was exiled into the forest for 14 years. And while he was in the forest, according to them, he suffered so much. And it is described that his feet were constantly punctured by little thorns and by pebbles, and his feet were wounded very much. So the Jains say that actually Lord Rama was suffering his karmic reactions. He was suffering the reactions of his karma. Why? Because in his previous incarnation, when he came as Vamana Dev, he cheated Bali Maharaj by using those same feet, because he initially told Bali Maharaj that I will only take land which fits within these feet of mine. But then eventually he expanded the length of his feet and then eventually covered the whole universe. So according to the Jain logic, Vamana Dev had tricked Bali Maharaj and he had cheated him. And because of that, he incurred sinful reactions. And to suffer those sinful reactions, he had to take birth again in the form of Ram and suffer in the forest for 14 years. So you can see, to those who are devotees of the Supreme Lord, or those who actually follow the Vaishnava tradition, these kinds of statements can be very distressing, because these kinds of statements are completely against real Siddhanta. So that is why Ramanujacharya took up the responsibility of removing the whole Jainism from the southern region of the Indian subcontinent, and now it's pretty much like non-existent there. So there are very small sections which are there in like the western part of India, but pretty much like majority of that philosophy is also watered down and it's pretty much non-existent. Or in one sense, it has merged with the mainstream Vedic tradition. So then we see that Madhvacharya comes along as well. Madhvacharya was the subsequent Acharya after Ramanujacharya. And he also recognized that Ramanujacharya was more focused on defeating the Jains, but he wasn't really focused on firstly establishing the Supreme as Lord Vishnu and defeating the Mayavadis. So he took an even more aggressive campaign against the Mayavadis and wrote thousands and thousands of books. I'm not exaggerating when I say he's written so many books against Mayavad, and his disciples have written so much against Mayavad that if we read all of that, like it'll like create like a mess in our brain, because there's so much he has written. And he was very fierce in his attacks against the Mayavadis. So much so that it was described, if we read the life of Madhvacharya, we will see that the Mayavadis were terrified of him and they would run away when they would find out that Madhvacharya was approaching a particular city or a town. So then after that we see that Caitanya Mahaprabhu comes along, and Caitanya Mahaprabhu came 500 years ago. And his task was, so he noticed that, all these people, Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, have done their respective paths. They have either established the Vedas or they have established that Lord Vishnu is the Supreme, etc. But then Caitanya Mahaprabhu had an even bigger task, which was to give the most confidential knowledge to everyone. And that was of Krishna Prema, and to establish that even above Narayana is Lord Krishna. And he also had to essentially establish the principles of religion, which were that, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam shrajamyaham. So Krishna comes to establish paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So he also had to establish the yuga dharma. He had to establish the dharma for this yuga. And at the same time continue the work of the previous acharyas, which was to propagate this mission of Krishna consciousness. So then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used a very interesting tactic which hasn't been used by anyone before, and that was Nagar Sankirtan. And that was why? Because we can see that if you look at the previous history, like whenever there would be discussions and arguments and all of these things, they would only happen amongst the intellectuals and only amongst the brahmanas. The general public generally would either not be interested, or the whole argument would be going over their head, like nothing would make sense to them. So then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu realized that actually it's not just the brahmanas who need to be saved. Actually everyone needs to be saved, and every living entity needs to be saved also. So then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took up this movement of congregational chanting and dancing, by which not only human beings but also animals and plants and every living entity can be delivered also. So then we see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was, so that's why it's explained here that when the devotees were stopped from performing Nagar Sankirtan, at that time Chaitanya Mahaprabhu became extremely angry. Why? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu knew that this mission has to spread throughout the world, and this mission or this congregational chanting of the holy names of the Lord is meant to be established all across the world, not just in a particular sect of India or in a particular part of India or just among a particular sect of people. But this is a universal movement which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to establish. And the way he did it was not through sitting down and arguing with different people. Like, of course, we see in the Caitanya Caritamrta that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did have discussions, especially with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, with Prakashananda Saraswati, and some other scholars also. But that was not his major mission. His major mission was to spread the congregational chanting and dancing of at the names of Lord Krishna throughout this world. And we see that that has been extremely effective. And it comes with some drawbacks, but majority of the time we can see that it has been more than effective. Because we see that not only the brahmanas, but there are descriptions of even animals being liberated by this movement. Like Srila Prabhupada would often say that by chanting, all the insects in the room, by loud chanting, all the insects in the room get delivered. Through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastime, we see that there was a dog which belonged to Shivananda Sen, and that dog was delivered just by association of a pure devotee. We see that when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was passing through the forests of Jharkhand, at that time all of the animals started chanting and dancing, and all of them became liberated also. So this Hare Krishna movement is extremely powerful, in the sense that chanting of Hare Krishna itself can deliver a human being or a living entity. Now, the speciality of the Hare Krishna mantra is that it does not just rely on the intelligence. So you can see that the whole point of discussion and intellectual debate was to convince someone else through the process of intelligence. So you pretty much don't do anything with the senses, you don't do anything with the mind, and you pretty much just use the intelligence. Whereas the Hare Krishna movement, it involves everything. So it involves the senses by chanting, it involves the mind by constantly remembering and constantly meditating upon the Lord. It involves intelligence also. How? Because devotees also sit down and discuss this philosophy. And devotees also may sit down and try to understand literature, Vedic literature as well, including the Caitanya Caritamrta. That is why the Hare Krishna movement is much more beneficial and it's much more powerful at delivering the mass of people compared to just intellectual debate alone. Now the question may be asked, a counter argument may be put to me that, if we read Narad Bhakti Sutra, for example, and if we read the instructions of previous acharyas, we see that actually they were not interested in debating. In fact, one of the instructions in Narad Bhakti Sutra, when Narad Muni is instructing on how to perform devotional service, is that a devotee of the Lord does not engage in debate. So now, if that is the case, then why is it that Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, and everyone else, all the other acharyas, including Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, why is it that they engaged in debate? In fact, even one of our acharyas, Baldev Vidyabhushan, he engaged in a huge debate as well. So are they transgressing the principles of devotional service by engaging in debate? In fact, we see our own Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, if we read Bhagavad Gita, the whole of Bhagavad Gita, starting from the beginning to the end, is essentially an exposition on how to defeat Mayavad. Literally, every opportunity Srila Prabhupada gets, he is bashing Mayavad in his purports. So now the question may be asked that if it is said that a pure devotee of the Lord should not engage in debate, then why is it that all of our acharyas, including Srila Prabhupada, engaged in debate with the atheists, with the Mayavadis, and with the Shunyavadis? Shunyavadis are Buddhists, essentially. So the answer is explained in the Narad Bhakti Sutra itself by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, where they explain that to establish the supremacy of the Lord, when the devotees' minds are disturbed, in that case, debate is not forbidden. So essentially, a person may enter into debate if it is for the welfare of the devotees and if it is essential for establishing the principles of religion. In that case, a person or an acharya may engage in debate. But, so then is the instruction in Narad Bhakti Sutra not relevant to us? Well, the idea is that we don't engage in useless debate. Like, useless debate means that if the question is not to establish the supremacy of the Lord, if the question is about some political issue, or if the question is about some social issue that's going on, then the devotee does not engage in debating those kinds of things, because that's essentially considered a waste of time, and it's also considered, we essentially lose our humility in that pursuit. So we only engage in debate when there are questions as to the authority of the scriptures, questions to the authority of the acharya. Like if someone is blaspheming the acharya, then one should engage in debate to protect the position of the acharya. Like we see this example, there are many examples of this, but one of the most prime examples is Yamunacharya. Like Yamunacharya was the guru of Sripad Ramanujacharya. And we see that he engaged in a huge debate with the king's royal Brahmana to establish the position of Vaishnavas, essentially. So basically the story goes that the king at that time, he had a royal Brahmana who was very good at debating, and he was very good in the art of debating. And what he would do is he would go and debate with people, and whenever he would defeat someone, the person who lost had to pay tax to this Brahmana, and this Brahmana would give part of that tax to the king. So the king maintained him like that. So we see that he would go around, and he went to Yamunacharya's guru as well. And when he went there, he told him that you either engage in debate with me, or if you accept that you're going to lose and you're not going to win against me, then you pay me tax. So Yamunacharya's guru, who was naturally very humble and he didn't want to engage in debate just for the sake of debate, he decided that, okay, well, I'm not going to engage in debate, and he started paying tax. So when Yamunacharya saw that, he was only a 6-year-old boy at the time, and when he saw that his guru is being humiliated in front of everyone, by, even though he knew that his guru was an extremely good scholar, he was a very good Vedic scholar, but out of his natural humility, he was not debating. But the impression that was going out to everyone was that Yamunacharya's guru is a fool and he is not very knowledgeable. So then at that point, Yamunacharya took it upon himself that, okay, I am going to go and debate with the king's royal Brahmana. So then it is described that he went in and he asked the Brahmana he challenged him to a debate, first of all. And then the Brahmana asked him questions in the royal assembly. And Yamunacharya essentially answered all of them. And then it is said that Yamunacharya posed 3 questions in front of that Brahmana, which he could not answer at all. So then it was determined that Yamunacharya won the actual debate, and his guru was relieved of the tax that he had to pay. And everyone could understand that if Yamunacharya, a 6-year-old boy, is so intelligent, how much more intelligent or how much more knowledgeable or scholarly would his guru be? So we can see that if one is insulting the Supreme Lord, or if one is insulting the acharyas or the guru, then one may have to enter into debate. Now, it is not that we actually resort to violence. That is what Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport also, that there is a natural tendency to become violent in these instances also, especially when we enter into the mode of passion and one is really trying to establish their superiority over someone else. It is quite natural that people become violent. We see in the crusades that happened for almost 700 years, where one religion was trying to establish their superiority over another in terms of establishing their rule in Jerusalem. So we can see that it is quite possible that people may become violent, but actually it is explained that we should try to use non-violent means as much as possible in the first, in the beginning, and only resort to violence when there is an absolute necessity. So it's not that violence is absolutely condemned, but violence should not be used as the first option. So, like in the Vedic tradition, it's described that there are 4 ways of diplomacy: Sama, Dama, Bheda, and Danda. So these are very, very commonly they're used. Sama means, so basically it means that it's a gradual, stepwise approach. And while we are at the workplace, it's known as graded assertiveness, so you could say. So basically what happens is Sama means that you sit down and you try to discuss with the other person, you flatter the other person and try to get them to agree with you on certain points. You try to remind them of your relationship with them, etc., like that. And then in that way, maybe a lot of people are convinced when there are differences between 2 parties. So that is one way. If that doesn't work, the next one is Dama. Dama means you offer gifts to someone. You offer gifts and you offer some reward or something like that, or essentially like a bribe to try and convince someone of your own position. Now, this may sound a bit, it may sound like, hey, what are we doing? Why are we bribing someone? But actually, if you look at it, it's the whole reason why this grade of assertiveness is there is to avoid war and killing. So if you can reach some kind of agreement by giving gifts and by manipulating the other person, then yeah, sure, that's fine as well, that's acceptable. This is in the realm of politics, not really in the realm of devotional service, but just discussing it anyways. And then the next one is Bheda. Bheda is where you threaten the other person with trying to create like a divide and rule kind of scenario. And basically you don't actually enter into the fight, but you threaten that, okay, if we enter into the fight, then these are the consequences, we should try to avoid it, etc. So we see that this was very common in the Mahabharata, like when the Pandavas wanted to rule over, well, when Krishna wanted the Pandavas to rule over the entire world, and they wanted Dhritarashtra and his sons to give up their kingdom. So it is described that they used this Bheda quite a lot, because they would go to the king and they would often remind him that, you know, if there was a war, everyone is going to die. So it's better that you give Yudhishthir and his brothers 5 kingdoms, or not 5 kingdoms, sorry, 5 villages to rule at least. So they tried all these forms of diplomacy to make sure that a war doesn't happen. And then when all of those discussions fail, then the last one is Danda. Danda means that then the fight eventually takes place. So in a civilized society, whenever there are differences amongst different people, like this is the tactic that people generally try to use. And the first one of them is to sit down and discuss the issue. So that's what Srila Prabhupada points out here as well, that whenever there are differences or whenever there is opposition to the Hare Krishna movement, the first thing we should do is we should intellectually try to convince the other party that of the importance of the Hare Krishna movement. But to be able to do that, the main thing is that ourselves should be well conversed and well read in our own philosophy. We should understand Srila Prabhupada's books, Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission, and not just Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission, but the mood and mission of the Acharyas and the entire parampara. So if we can understand that, then we can essentially try to convince, because in this world we can understand there are many demoniac forces that are trying to stop the movement of Srila Prabhupada and the movement of Lord Chaitanya. And we as devotees, it is our responsibility. In fact, it's quite an honor that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada has given to us of propagating their movement that they've already started. Our task is to preserve what they've started and to try and expand as much as possible. Now, we cannot do it at a great level as much as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Srila Prabhupada did, but we can do whatever is there in our own capacity. And to do that, firstly, we need to be convinced of the philosophy ourselves. Srila Prabhupada often warned his disciples that if we are not very well educated, especially in the matter of astronomy and evolution and things, biology and things, he would often discourage his disciples from going and entering into a debate because that actually just creates a negative impression. So therefore, it was recommended that the devotees also be well informed, not just of our own philosophy, but also of the opposing views if we are to engage in debate. Like historically, as I said, we've seen many cases. Even Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he debated against a scholar in a Hindu university who was trying to prove that the Vedic astronomy system is outdated and that we should consider using the modern astronomy system. So it is explained that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur engaged in such a fierce debate and he humiliated the professor so much that he actually urinated on the spot. So it is a very graphic description, but the idea is there that if we are to establish this position, it needs to be done with knowledge. And the way to finish this discourse is that one of the names of Krishna in the Vishnu Sahasranama is Nandaki. Nandaki means one who holds a sword. Now, in the commentary to that name, all the acharyas have mentioned that the sword that is being talked about here is the sword of knowledge. And that is why it is explained that all of our acharyas have used this sword of knowledge to slash the ignorance of the common mass of people and also to establish religious principles throughout this world. So that is Krishna's mood, that is Krishna's mission. And the more we imbibe this mood and mission, the more we will be able to propagate this movement of Krishna consciousness. So having said that, I will finish there. I'll leave it open for any comments, any disagreements, any debate. Okay, that's fine. Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, earlier when you said that in the Vaishnava tradition we use the senses as opposed to intelligent discourse, how we're using the mind and the intelligence like to engage. So that's like the subtle body, right? Mind, intelligence, ego. So the ego, is that like mind intelligence for good engagement, but ego is bad? Are we trying to...
Yeah, so essentially, I'll just clarify what I said. So what I said was in the traditional Vedic system, they would just use the intelligence, whereas in the Vaishnava tradition, we use all of them. So we use the senses, we use the mind, and we use the intelligence. We use all three of them.
Not the ego.
The ego, the problem is it's extremely subtle, and most of our acharyas have not commented on it. So the main thing with the ego is to understand that we are not the body and that we are the eternal servant of Krishna. So in that sense, yes, we do engage the ego as well, but we don't use that ego to preach or debate, if that makes sense. Yeah, so when we go out for the preaching, or when we go out for discussing with other people, we mostly engage at the platform of the senses, the mind, and the intelligence of the other people. Ultimately, with a hope to transform their false ego as well. Yeah, that's the idea. So it is there, but it's not explicitly stated because it's just a very theoretical concept. Because our acharyas have always told us to preach at the level of sambandha jnana, not at the level of prayojana jnana. So it means that we pretty much try to engage people at the level of their senses, their mind, and their intelligence, not so much at the level of their false ego. But it's a subtle process which will happen in due course if we use the other two anyways.
The disintegration of the ego.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So to ultimately realize that we are a servant of Krishna, it comes through engaging the senses, engaging the mind, and engaging the intelligence. And then slowly, as we engage all of these properly, then the false ego goes away as well.
Yeah. Pay obeisances offering the ego, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So by offering obeisances, we get rid of our false ego. That's right. Yeah. Excellent. Yes, Prabhu.
No, but when you're going through the different stages of the acharyas developing the philosophy, so when you got to Lord Caitanya, you said he would introduce the Yugadana, and that way not just the Brahmins, all the humanities will benefit. And you said there were some drawbacks to that.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't elaborate on that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. Yeah, I've made a lot of points. The drawbacks I was talking about was that immediately, not even immediately after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left, but even during the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there was a group of people known as the Sahajiyas who started appearing. And they tried to imitate the process of Krishna consciousness without accepting the philosophy. So these people, what they were doing is they were reading the Rasa Leela of Krishna, and they were engaging in all kinds of sinful activities, but at the same time chanting Hare Krishna, having tears when tears from their eyes falling when they're chanting Hare Krishna. And like superficially, if you look at them, you think, oh my God, like they're extremely great devotees, but their lives were complete messes. And like that's why when Vivekananda went to the West, he said that the Vaishnava religion, in fact, he made very vile comments against Vaishnavism because of the Sahajiyas at the time. So the Sahajiyas had destroyed the reputation of Vaishnavism to such an extent that up until Bhaktivinoda Thakur, basically the whole Caitanya Caritamrta had been lost as well, because the Sahajiya movement just took over so much. So that is what I was trying to point out, that there were some drawbacks to that, but then Bhaktivinoda Thakur came along and he revived the whole movement again and brought back Caitanya Caritamrta and established that authority as well. Yeah, thank you for bringing that point, because yeah, I wanted to comment on it, but because of so many other points, I kind of forgot. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu?
You mentioned the three types of argument, Jalpa, Vitanda, and Vada.
Vada, yeah.
Then you said that the proper, after describing Vada and then Vitanda, you said the proper type of discussion, the proper type of argument is Jalpa.
Jalpa, yeah.
But then in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that he is this Vada, the third one.
Yeah, Vada, that's right. Vada is essentially used for establishing that, like basically if, okay, so how do I explain it? So, okay, so basically if we look at Vad is basically testing a theory. And when a theory is tested, you can either agree with the theory or you can disagree with the theory, but it involves the least form of aggression and it involves the least form of false ego, you could say. Because all someone does is they just speculate, and then that whole discussion happens around that particular speculation that a particular person has made. There's no negativity associated with it as such, because in Vitanda, all you're doing is you're destroying the arguments of the other person. So a person may naturally become very rajasic when they're doing that. And it's the same case with Jalpa also. When the people are constantly debating and constantly trying to destroy one person over the other, there can be a tendency to become or fall into the trap of false ego. Whereas in the case of Jalpa, among all three of them, that is considered to be the most sattvic amongst all of them. But it does mean that there are drawbacks to all of them as well. And the main drawback of Jalpa is that you can't actually establish the supreme truth just based on Jalpa. Or not Jalpa, or just based on Vada. Because all you do is, it's like the process of science. Like you put a theory out there, and whether or not that theory is true or not, that's all you can test. You can't really establish what the actual law is. So in terms of being sattvic, Krishna says that I am Vada amongst all of them. It's not in terms of which one is the most definite and which one of them has the most impact. So that would be my understanding of that.
In the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada says that Vada refers to the conclusive truth.
I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that. So yeah, I'll look into that and then yeah, have a look at that. Yeah, I mean, the way I understand it is, I understood it from that perspective. So I'm happy to look into that. Thank you for that. Yeah. Any other comments or questions or anything someone wants to share? I'll have to see the actual Sanskrit and see what's going on there. Yeah.
That's what I was just trying to find now. I think it might be chapter 10. There's two sections where Krishna's making comparisons to...
Yeah, so it'll be in chapter 10 most likely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ten 22. 32. 10:32. Okay. I'll have a look at the other acharyas also and see what they've said, and I'll try to get back to you on that one. Yeah, I can't say I'm not going to do a jalpa here, but yeah, I'll try to find out. Okay. Yeah, that's right. No danda at this stage. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpa tarubhyasya kripa sindhubhya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Yeah, takes 32.
32, yeah, okay. I'll have a look.